Welcome to 'Cause We're Nerds, the podcast that covers trends and new releases in comics, movies, video games, board games, and much more. I'm your host, Caleb, and today we are discussing Solo, a Star Wars story. Do the new cast live up to the Star Wars legacy? And what changes were made during its troubled production? And, is this movie really necessary? Find out the answers to these questions and much more on today's episode of 'Cause We're Nerds. Well, welcome back, everybody. Today is a special day because we have our first guest. Hey, Blaine.
Hey, guys.
So, Zach is doing adulting today, and he's off busy. So we decided, well, what's the next best thing? It's to get his brother.
Well, I would say it's probably the best thing, an upgrade over Zach. So, what can I say?
Well, we are excited to have you. And Blaine was supposed to be on this episode when Zach could still record. So he's not here just as a stand-in. You are kind of a resident Star Wars expert?
Yeah, I know a lot more than Zach, so I would say this is going to be pretty good.
Is that
You're in for a treat.
That's the measuring system, is better than Zach or not better than Zach?
That's how I always measure it.
Perfect. All right, well, we have quite a bit of news, so we're going to go ahead and jump into that. So, Blaine, are you familiar with the Galaxy's Edge park that Disneyland's doing?
I am. I'm very excited for it.
So, it's actually Disneyland and Disneyworld are both doing it, and they were supposed to open next year. They've announced specific seasons. So, for Disneyland, that's the one in California, it's going to open in the summer of next year, and Disneyworld is opening in the fall. Are you excited for this?
Very excited. I think I might have to make a trip down to Disney World just to go see this park.
When's the last time you were at Disney?
Oh, wow. Probably 13 years ago. So
wow.
Quite a while.
Yeah, that is a long time. So I was there just this past February for the first time in 10 years or so. My wife is a really, really big Disney fan, so I took her down there. And I'm excited for this. They're actually doing a hotel to go along with this, and it's supposed to be really immersive. So I told her, we're not going to go when this opens. We're going to go when the hotel opens. I think it's supposed to be the following year in 2020. And we're going to stay at the hotel on premises. And it's supposed to be so immersive where you basically come down from your room, get in a, quote, shuttle, and it, quote, shuttles you down like a spaceship into the park. And so you never see the outside world.
That sounds really fun. I'll definitely have to take a look at that when it's completed.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited for this. I hope that it's as good as everything I've seen for it looks. In other news on TV, HBO is doing a Watchmen show. Were you aware of this?
I was aware of it. I'm not sure how I feel, but I mean,
yeah.
I'll give it a shot. It's HBO. They tend to come out with some good shows.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. I'm assuming you've seen the movie?
Yes, I have.
Did you like the movie?
I thought it was a really good movie, a good comic adaptation.
So, I've seen the movie. I've actually never read the comic. I own it. I keep meaning to read it. So, I don't have an issue with it not being exactly like the comic, but I enjoy the movie a lot, although I haven't seen it really since it came out. But the HBO show that they're doing has cast 6 new people for that show. These people are Regina King, Don Johnson, Tim Blake Nelson, Louis Gossett Jr., Adeline Clemens, and Andrew Howard. Now, I really only recognize one of these people, Tim Blake Nelson. Do you know any of these guys?
Not really. I might recognize them if I saw their faces, but not just from their names.
Yeah, I looked them up, and I might recognize Regina King, like, from her picture, but again, not really sure. I'm cautiously optimistic for this. We don't know if these people are going to be playing the core Watchmen or not. We actually really don't know what the show is about. There's been conflicting reports about whether or not it's a continuation, or if it's set in the same world with different characters, or if it's completely new. So I am excited to see what they do with it. But looking away from the TV screen and onto the movie screen, we have several pieces of news. First up is Transformers. Are you a fan, Blaine?
I was in the beginning, but I don't think I've seen any of the movies past 3, maybe?
Okay, so that's not really bad at all, because everything past 3 is like the same movie. Like the world gets invaded and all the others. I remember going to see the fourth one and I was like, well, this wasn't a bad movie. It just went for an extra hour longer than it should have. And then I saw the last one. I was like, nope, that's the last straw. I cannot do another one. And because of that kind of response, Transformers The Last Night is going to be the last Transformers movie in that line, aside from the Bumblebee spinoff movie that they are doing later this year.
That's probably a good thing. It's kind of run its course, to be honest.
Yeah, I think a reboot would be good. I'm a fan of Transformers in the toys and in the cartoons, and I think that they need to embrace that more for the movies. Kind of like War of Cybertron did for the games.
I agree. Make some more cartoons and call that good.
Well, in another robot-focused franchise, Terminator Genisys. This was the last Terminator movie they did. I was gonna go see this, and I just never got around to it.
Same here. I had a little bit of interest in it, but it came and went, and I just never got around to it.
Yeah, one of my big reasons I wanted to see it was Emilia Clarke from Game of Thrones was playing Sarah Connor, but that just wasn't enough for me to go see it. And, that movie ended up not doing very well at all. And they had an interview with Emilia, and she said something really funny. So famously, Fantastic Four, the newest one they did, had a terrible production. It flopped really bad. And the production on Terminator Genisys was so bad that the Fantastic Four team had jackets made, and on the back it said, "At least we're not on Terminator."
Yeah, I did see those when that news came out.
Yeah, that's really funny and actually really surprising to me because the Fantastic Four just had such a rough time. I couldn't imagine another movie being worse, except for maybe the movie we're going to talk about today. But, I guess it is what it is. James Bond 25 has been announced. Are you a fan of the Bond series?
I am. I think Daniel Craig did a great job, brought it back down to earth versus, some of the gadgets they were using. But I like all of them. It gives it a good mix, I think.
So, I'm going to be honest, I've only ever seen one James Bond movie. It was the second Craig one. I think it's Quantum of Solace. Is that right?
Yep, that's probably the worst one, in my opinion.
So I didn't like it, really, at all. But I also didn't see the first one, and I'd never seen a Bond film, so I was kind of confused what was going on half the time. So this really has no bearing on me, but it has been confirmed that Daniel Craig will be returning for this film, which is strange, because he said it's going to be the last film for the past, 2?
Yeah, he keeps saying it's going to be the last film, but then he goes back on it. I don't know if he just really likes playing James Bond or if he's getting a lot of pressure from other people to do it, but
or if they're just throwing money at him.
that could be too.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see. I don't know if I'll see this. I mean, James Bond is on my bucket list of movies to watch, but that list is so long. I don't know if I'll ever get to everything. But bringing it back down to the small screen again, specifically Netflix, we have Daredevil Season 3 that's currently in production. Zach, you're not Zach.
I am not Zach.
I spend too much time with Zach.
It's okay. Zach calls people Caleb all the time.
Does he really?
Yeah, he does. One friend in particular, every time he calls him Caleb, every time I'm around him. It's pretty funny.
That's amazing. Okay, well, sorry, Blaine. Blaine, are you a fan of the Daredevil series? I'm assuming you are because it's so good.
I am. It was amazing.
Yeah, so Season 1 was really good. Season 2, the first 4 episodes were really good. The next few were a little not quite as good, but I still enjoyed them. So yeah. I'm looking forward to Season 3. Hopefully it's a return to form after we had Defenders.
Yeah, that wasn't the best, I would have to say.
I mean, we've had Punisher and Jessica Jones since then. I am really far behind, so I haven't seen them. Have you watched them?
I've watched Punisher, and I'm about halfway through Jessica Jones.
How do you feel about those?
I thought Punisher was really good. Jessica Jones it hasn't caught my interest like the first season.
Okay.
But I don't know if that's just the villain isn't that great or, what's going on there.
I've heard similar things from other people about the Jessica Jones, so it's probably not just you. But for Season 3 of Daredevil, Bullseye is pretty much always rumored to be in Daredevil. He's one of his major villains. But they released a new picture with a logo on it that has this sort of Bullseye image in the background. And this might be confirming that we will actually be getting Bullseye this season.
I think that would be a great villain to have. I mean, Bullseye's Daredevil's main villain, aside from maybe the Kingpin. But half the time when the Kingpin fights Daredevil, he just hires Bullseye to go kill him. I think that if Bullseye is the villain, we're going to be in for a treat.
Yeah, and I think that it would be a really great thing to bring Fisk out of prison and have him hire Bullseye in that same kind of comic book style. Also, Netflix, other news, it is now the most valuable media company in the world, surpassing Disney.
That is crazy. I remember when Netflix was just a service where you could order DVDs and they'd mail them to you.
Yeah, you know they still have that service?
I have heard that. I'm not sure why they keep that around. I don't know anybody who uses it, but I mean, I guess if you have a bunch of DVDs lying around, might as well do something with them.
Yeah, so I think it's a bit two-pronged. So part of it is, you know, there's a lot of rural areas around the United States that don't have good internet. And so for them, it's better to actually have the physical disc. But also, their library of disc movies is massive. They have tons of things you can get on disc that you can't stream.
Well, I guess that explains it.
Yeah, so my brother actually told me this the other day, and I didn't believe him, because I'm like, there's no way Netflix is more valuable than Disney. Disney's Disney. Disney owns everything, but it is true. And that's all we have for news today, guys.
Is it all we have?
Oh, do you have something for us?
I do. Just recently, it was announced that James Mangold was going to direct a new Boba Fett movie. I figured this was good to talk about on our solo podcast.
Yeah, look at me dropping the ball. So, was this actually announced, or is it a rumor?
I think it's been officially announced.
Interesting. Okay, so is that going to be the next solo movie they do? Well, not the solo movie. The next spin-off movie?
I believe it is. They already have some artwork out for it. People, casting Taika Waititi. Taika Waititi. That's
Taika Waititi. Yeah, the director of Thor Ragnarok.
So some people think he might make a good Boba Fett. There's obviously the kid from Attack of the Clones. People are saying he could reprise the role, or the one who played Jango Fett could do it if it takes place after episode 6.
Interesting. Is that kid still acting? Do you know?
I'm not sure. I do know he did a Boba Fett cosplay the other day, and he looked really good in it. Very close to Boba Fett for, casting a young kid as Boba Fett, so.
Sure. Okay, that's interesting. I don't know how I feel about that. I guess I feel the same way I did when Solo was announced, like, not needed. I'm not a big fan of Boba Fett. I don't really understand why everyone loves him so much. Especially people that grew up on the original trilogy, because he is really lame in that. Like, he shows up for a second and gets his backpack busted and falls down into the Sarlacc and gets eaten. I don't know what about that is cool.
Part of it is he was just a mysterious character at first. But in the EU and Legends, as it is called now, which was all of the books, games that came out after episode 6, which Disney got rid of, he had a lot of different books about him. There was a video game about him. So a lot of people gained interest in him that way. And it's never really, lost that interest that they've had.
Okay, see, that makes sense to me. But just based on the movies, I never got how he could be such a popular character. I was excited for the Star Wars 1313 game that they were doing, which was supposed to be you're a bounty hunter. I'm not sure if he was playing into that or not. That ultimately got canceled. But if it's anything like that, I could actually be excited for that movie.
Yeah, we'll have to see when some more stuff comes out about it, what direction they end up taking with it.
All right, well, while we are not talking about the Boba Fett movie today, we are talking about the Han Solo movie. Solo, a Star Wars film. A Star Wars story, I guess, is what they're actually calling them now. So we both saw this. I saw this Thursday night at 9:30 in an IMAX screening. Not 3D. I don't know if they're doing 3D for this movie. Do you know, Blaine?
I haven't heard one way or the other.
Okay, so how did you see this film?
I saw it on a mega screen, basically IMAX. Saw it Thursday night. It was very good, except for at the beginning, they had us zoomed in 2 times, so the words were cut off.
Oh.
And I just thought something was off, and I thought it was a terrible movie at first, until they came out 15 minutes later and told us, oh, we are having a few technical difficulties. So then they skipped back to the beginning. We got to see like 3 minutes, and then they skipped ahead a little bit.
What?
So we got to watch some of it again, but let's just say it went from a really bad movie to a lot better when they zoomed us back out so we could see everything.
Wow. That's insane. So you missed like a whole part of the movie.
Technically I saw it, but I probably missed about 5 to 10 minutes of it zoomed in, just at that beginning flashback scene.
Wow. Okay. I didn't have any issues like that. It was really hot in our theater, but the screen projection was not one of the issues. So just like we did last week with Deadpool, we are going to do a spoiler-free section here at the front, so that those of you that haven't seen the movie yet are not going to be spoiled. And then we're going to do a spoiler warning, and then we're going to talk about everything else we want to talk about. So before we actually get into spoiler territory, Blaine, can you just give us a really quick synopsis of the film?
Yeah. So Han Solo and Chewbacca team up for the first time. Trying to pay off the gangster Dryden Voss, they go together and meet up with Lando Calrissian on an adventure.
All right, well, this movie did finally come out, but it had a lot of production issues. Originally, they had 2 directors, Chris Lord and Phil Miller. Those are the guys who did the Lego movie. I think they did the Jump Street movies as well.
Yep, they did those.
And so they were brought in, and Blaine, you might have more information on this, but from everything I got, things just really broke down.
Yeah, Kathleen Kennedy came in, and it kind of sounded like they weren't going in the direction she wanted. And from what I've seen, she's kind of just happy to give anybody the axe if she doesn't like the direction they're going. And that was the case with these 2.
Yeah, and Kathleen Kennedy is the person that's currently in charge of the Star Wars franchise over at Disney, or I guess technically Lucasfilm, but under Disney's leadership, she is the one that is doing all the Star Wars stuff. So she is the one that has first and last say for all of these things. So you really want to make sure she's happy. One thing I heard was that they were injecting too much comedy. I know that there's been reports that they saw Han as a comedic character, which he can be, but he's more like a straight-laced comedic character, and that they were taking that too far. And also that the guy that's playing Han, how do you pronounce his name?
Alden Ehrenreich.
Alden Ehrenreich, all right. That he was bad at acting.
Yeah, those were a lot of the rumors. In fact, a lot of people speculate that the first, 15, 20 minutes of the film is actually pretty close to what Lord and Miller would have done, and that Ron Howard basically reshot the rest of it.
Uh-huh.
So you can kind of feel a different tone there. It's a bit more humorous. It kind of feels like that 21 Jump Street type feel, whereas the rest of it feels more like a Star Wars adventure along the lines of the original trilogy.
Yeah, I could see that. I didn't feel a big disconnect, though. I mean, I actually really enjoyed the opening. I felt that whether or not they reshot it or not, it worked really, really well. And I didn't have an issue with Alden in this movie. I had seen him in some other films before this movie, and I didn't understand how they could say he's a bad actor, because he is not. He's actually really, really good.
I think part of the problem was people were expecting Harrison Ford, and that's what they wanted. But you can't just get a young Harrison Ford. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
So what they did was they tried to find the best alternative, someone who kind of looked like him, although half the people say he does, half the people say he doesn't. He did get the mannerisms pretty close, I thought. And his acting was not as bad as people were saying. In fact, I thought he did a really good job with what he was given.
Yeah, I agree. I think that while he doesn't look exactly like Harrison Ford, you can't get someone that looks exactly like him and can act exactly like him. That is so unreasonable. I think that what they did is a good choice. They got someone that, like you said, sort of kind of looks like him. But what they do with him in this movie, I feel, makes him look like Harrison Ford, or maybe an alternate version of a young Harrison Ford. And his portrayal of everything, it really works. I know some of the shots in the trailer, some of the lines didn't really land for me. I wasn't really sure how they were going to work, but in the context of the movie, I think they work really well.
I agree with that.
So, aside from Han, we do have a couple other characters that we know of from the trailers, like Chewie and Emilia Clarke's character. How do you feel these other people did with their characters?
I thought they did a really good job. Chewbacca gets a lot more screen time than a lot of the other movies. You see some of his motivation. I really enjoyed that. Donald Glover probably did the best job out of everybody, portraying Lando Calrissian. Mm-hmm. When you first see him, he just nails the way Lando speaks. He drops that a little bit later, but it's a really good way to kind of transition from the version we get in episode 5 and 6 to this one. Kira, which is Emilia Clarke's character, I think she did a solid job. A lot of people were saying you could only see her as, Daenerys from Game of Thrones, but I didn't think that was true. I thought she separated those two characters, which is a problem that a lot of people can have if, you've been kind of typecast as one person and are known for a certain role, coming up with a different character and separating it.
Right. Yeah, I thought she actually did a really good job separating that as well. I have heard complaints in the past where people can't separate her from Daenerys in their mind. And I think that's more of a personal thing than an actual what's happening, because she does not act like that character at all in this film. I do really like Chewie and Lando in this film as well. You are right. They just nail Lando. I don't know how they did it, but they made him seem the same as he used to be, but also cool by today's standards.
Yeah, like I said, he was probably my favorite character in the entire movie. And
it's not a big spoiler, so I'm still not going to say it. But there's an explanation about why some things about Lando are the way they are in regards to Han in this movie, which I thought was definitely not needed, but kind of a nice nod. And Chewie as well. I think Chewie was great. Is this the same guy actually that did Chewie in the newest movies?
No, I believe this is a new actor. It's Jonas Suotamo. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce that, but I think this is the first time he's played Chewbacca.
Okay, that's interesting, because I would have thought they would have got the same person that played him in 7.
Yeah, actually you're right. Jonas Suotamo did play him in 7 and 8.
Okay, so that makes sense that it's the same guy, because I feel the body language for Chewbacca and everything in this film is spot on, and we do see him in a new light, especially when we're first introduced to him. I have never seen Chewie in that way before, and we'll get into what that means, but it was an interesting twist, I thought.
I agree. I thought it was a good introduction for him, too.
Now, I know when Episode 7 came out, a lot of people had issues with some of the environments or some of the creatures in the film, like the one that's on Han's ship in that movie that ends up getting loose and has all the tentacles and stuff. People are like, that's not a Star Wars creature, Yep. And I feel like this film, and really Rogue One as well, both of them have done a really, really good job firmly planting themselves in the Star Wars universe. And then with this one specifically, introducing new things that feel like they fit, but that we've never seen before.
I agree. I would have to say one of the characters at the beginning did feel a little bit like that, the one on the ship. But other than her, a lot of the characters seemed very Star Wars-esque. Mm-hmm. In fact, one of the things that I was really happy about is they brought aliens back from the original trilogy. So you see like a Rhodian at one point, which is like Greedo, who Han shoots. There are a couple others, I believe. I can't think of them right off the top of my head. But a lot of the sequel trilogy, they just come up with new aliens, which makes it feel separate from the rest of the original trilogy. Right. Whereas this, using those aliens that you see, kind of adds a little bit of that, connection.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. The new ones do have a lot of new creatures. I think they do have a few old ones, but the way that these spin-off movies build their world it does feel much more connected. And I think part of that also helps because they have typically had something to do directly with those original movies. I mean, this one obviously Han Solo and the places he goes, and then Rogue One specifically with the Death Star and those places. But it is interesting how they're able to tie in so closely. I also think it's interesting the character at the beginning that you're speaking of. I know who you're talking about, and I had the opposite reaction about whether or not she fit in the world, and we'll talk about that more in spoilers. But that was interesting. And, you know, I think this movie has 3 or 4 major planets I think it goes to.
Yeah, around that number.
Yeah, and they all feel very Star Wars-y. There's no Episode 8 casino in this film, I don't think.
No, not really.
All right, well, I think that might be all we can say without getting into spoilers. Is there anything else you want to say real quick?
No.
All right, so I would say, if I were to give this movie a review, a rating, I would say I enjoyed it a lot. I went into this with low expectations, I think, because of everything that had been happening, and I came out the other side, and I had a fantastic time. In fact, I know a lot of people don't feel this way, but for me personally, until it got to the third act, I had absolutely no complaints with the movie.
I am in the same boat. I'd probably give it 3.5 out of 5 stars. I went expecting a 1-star movie and I was pleasantly surprised. I put this right in the middle of all the Star Wars movies, so.
Oh, okay. See, I put this higher. In fact, I was thinking, until recently, The Last Jedi, when it came out, was actually my favorite Star Wars movie. I know some people love it. I know some people hate it. But the highs in that movie for me just made it my favorite, I think. This one might beat it. It's completely different, but it's so much fun. That's what I will say. This movie is a lot of fun. All right, so now we are going to go in spoiler territory. I'm going to give you guys a couple seconds to turn the recording off, just in case, because I hate it when I'm listening to something and they're like, spoiler warning. Okay, now here's the spoiler. So give you guys just a second to go ahead and shut that off, but we will be talking about everything in the movie, all spoilers, all twists, all turns. So please go watch the movie first and then come back and listen to this afterwards. All right. I think that was enough time. So, Blaine.
It was full of spoilers. Not really. There was really only one major spoiler that I can think of.
I think there's 2.
2.
I think there's 2.
Wait, which ones would you consider the spoilers?
So I would consider the identity of the main villain that's throughout the whole movie to be a spoiler, and then also the surprise cameo at the end.
Wouldn't that be considered the same?
No, I'm talking about the girl. I mean, we're in spoilers, so we can say it. So I didn't catch the name. I don't remember. But the main character of that leads like the Marauders that are following them around for the whole movie.
Oh, Infy's Nest.
Yes, her. I think that the fact that she ends up being a girl, a young girl, is a spoiler. And also probably the biggest reveal is the Darth Maul cameo.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest reveal and one of the things that confuse the most people.
Right. So I think that maybe we should take a step back and talk about those things closer to the end and kind of cover some of the things that we were just talking about that we couldn't really talk about because it was spoiler free.
All right. So the beginning of the movie, starting on Corellia?
Yes. So I knew from things I've heard that Han is from this planet, but I didn't realize how messed up this place is.
Yeah, I didn't really get a feel for that until actually seeing this movie and seeing kind of, the Imperial presence there, how he grew up and stuff. To be fair, this was the entire chunk that was zoomed in, so I don't have the best feeling, which could be one of the reasons I don't like that very minor villain that he works for in the beginning. Right. Maybe it was just because it was super zoomed in on her.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that. And I could also see people just not liking her in general. When she first came out, I was like, does this fit in Star Wars? And the more I thought about it, the more I decided yes, because she's almost like a smaller version of the giant worm that's in episode 5 on the asteroid.
Yeah. I I can see that.
That's kind of how I took it. I also thought it was really interesting how they introduced new things about different species. So like for her, they have to be away from light. I don't feel like Star Wars has really done that before. There's a lot of different species, but they're all, I guess, have the same like biological needs most of the time.
Except for the ones that can't breathe a normal atmosphere that like humans can breathe.
Is that what those masks are supposed to be?
On a lot of them, yeah.
Okay. See, I had no idea. I didn't know that. So that's
Plo
interesting.
Koon wears one in the original, or not the original, but the prequel series. He's one of the main ones I can think of.
Okay. I always thought that was maybe somehow part of them. I wasn't sure how, but that makes way more sense.
Yeah, there's a lot of different alien species who can't breathe our atmosphere.
Okay. So there was that. So I guess if you were surprised about this, you can't really speak to whether or not that this is how it was portrayed in the EU.
Yeah, I don't really remember. To be honest, I haven't read a ton of books that have taken place on Corellia.
Sure. Okay. Something that did really surprise me here is Solo not actually being his name. Is this something that's ever happened before?
I don't think so. I thought that was a little weird too, and I have mixed feelings on it. On one hand, it's kind of a cool way for him to get his name, but on the other hand, like it kind of takes away from the mythology of the original series with their names kind of being tied into their characters and stuff. Because Han Solo, like that's his name, but it's also who he is until the end of 4.
Right. I agree. I do have mixed feelings. On one aspect, I feel that it's a bit forced and a bit just on the nose. But at the same time, again, I kind of like it. I was talking to the people I went to the movie with, and I was like, so I know that he wouldn't have gone over there if Kira would have made it through with him. But if he did, would he then be Han Duo?
That's a very good question.
And it's also interesting that that's the name he actually sticks with, because he has no reason to keep it.
Not really. I guess, if he's part of the Imperial, that's what he's been called the entire time if he signed up with them and that's the name they gave him. So maybe he just got used to it. I don't know. That's where it gets a little
yeah,
for me, but
yeah, I did think also once he meets up with his crew that was a really interesting dynamic, and based on the trailers, I assumed that was going to last through the whole movie.
Yeah, I thought that was going to be probably most of the movie, him working with his crew, and then of course them all dying at the end because they're not in the rest of the movies, which is the same thing with Rogue One. You just expect everybody to die if they don't appear later. But yeah, they died really quickly. I did like how they met them on the planet and they were fighting, because that's a different side of war you see. It felt more like Battlefront Twilight Company, which is a book they have released.
Mm-hmm.
And the stormtroopers are kind of supposed to be more of an elite unit, not just the ground troops that go and die, which is kind of what Han Solo was, and where he met his crew.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting, too. It is way more gritty, I think, than any of the other war scenes that we've gotten in any of the Star Wars movies, which is funny, considering war is in the title. But I think that could actually work for, like, a whole movie. I think that atmosphere could really work. It really, I think, brings you down and makes you realize a little bit more how bad the Empire is. Because we always hear about how they're bad, but in some movies or in some media, there's not really a good sense of why they're bad. And in this, they call it out. He's like, we have to get rid of the hostiles. And he's like, oh, it's their planet. We're the hostiles.
I did notice that. But on the other hand, I think they portrayed the Empire in a more positive light than some of the other movies where they're, they were originally portrayed as Nazis. That's why they were called stormtroopers. But here, yes, they were invading. But there was things like there was the Imperial anthem that was on propaganda, which is supposed to be played like every Empire Day, which is, it's the Imperial March in our outside universe. But inside Star Wars, it's the Imperial anthem. So seeing that type of propaganda, seeing them giving orders to just regular people, fighting from the Empire side, I thought that gave a much needed view of how some of the people from the Empire see the Empire.
Sure. I think what we're saying is this movie just makes it a bit more complex, which I think is really good. I have never really been into the expanded universe stuff. However, last year, I actually got the newest Thrawn book that had just come out by Timothy Zahn, the one that is now canon, and I listened to it on audiobook, and it was the first Star Wars book I have ever read/listened to since Episode 3 was coming out, and that was a kid's book, so I don't really count it, and it was really good, and that whole book is kind of from the perspective of the Empire, and it really makes you realize that, yes, the Empire is bad, yes, they do bad things, but it's more complex than that, right? They do some really, really good stuff. And I think that is interesting to try to bring that into the movies.
I agree. They go a lot into this in different books. Lost Stars is another they kind of talk about. But you haven't really seen it in the movies up until, I would say, basically this one.
Yeah, and I hope to see more of that going forward. And I think that they have kind of done a little bit of that in the sequel trilogy as well. That they're bad, but they're not all bad. Kind of like Finn, he came from the First Order, so they can't be all bad. So that's really interesting. I kind of thought that the trajectory of this movie would be him trying to join up with these guys for most of the movie, and then an ending, like the beginning of the third act would be like, you're in this life for good, that line, and then they would do some heist. And it completely throws all of that out of the window, and really just goes on a Han Solo adventure journey, which I thought was a lot of fun and really entertaining.
Yeah, they really didn't go the direction I expected them to go, which I think was probably a good thing. I think what we got was very entertaining. Talking about the Empire being good and bad, you get to see a very bad part of the Empire with some of their slavery choices. And in this case, it's the Beast, which Han gets thrown down to, and you come to find out it's Chewbacca.
Yeah, so I don't know why I didn't realize what this was going to be, but when he was thrown down there and I saw the chain, I'm like, is this going to be a Rancor? Are we going to have a Rancor in a new movie?
I knew it was Chewbacca from the moment they said take him to the Beast. Okay. Just going to be honest there.
Yeah, I think that I was probably the only one that didn't realize this, but it did make me realize Chewbacca's been eating people?
Yes, but I don't think it's that weird, honestly. The Ewoks ate people. In fact, they were about to eat Luke and Han and Chewie was going to eat them first. So, I mean, it's not technically cannibalism because it's people, but...
It's people, right.
It could still be frowned on to eat a sentient species. I'm not entirely sure how that works in the Star Wars universe, but I suppose if you're hungry, you gotta eat something, might as well eat a person.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense when you really step back and look at it, but we've just never seen really any of the Star Wars characters portrayed that way, and so it was really shocking, especially with Chewbacca, because he can be mean, he can pull your arm off, but he's kind of a big, lovable oaf in some ways, which was interesting. I did also think that it was, I guess interesting. I hate to keep using that word, but it was cool and interesting when he came out. I'm pretty sure that he's based on Sasquatch from design. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the way it seems, at least.
Yeah. And so when he was lumbering out of that cage, I really felt like he looked like a Bigfoot character.
Yeah, he wasn't quite as fluffy, which I think helped, because he was all full of mud and dirt and stuff.
Yeah.
So I really liked the way he looked in this. And I think he looked very scary, very intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
And it definitely gives some of Han's threats in the later movies some, weight behind them when you see him like this.
Yeah, how do you feel about this new origin story? Because I know that in the EU, Han basically rescues Chewie from slavery, which is what happens, but I'm pretty sure it happens in a different way.
Yes, so in the EU, he's actually a lieutenant in the Imperial Navy, which they kind of just skipped and said, oh, he failed flight school because he was, too strong-headed, which I I wish they had gone a little bit more into his Imperial origins, but there he basically refuses an order to kill Chewie, and then he helps free him later, and they just stick together after that. So that would have taken a long time, I think. I think it was, an entire book that went over that. So I think this was a shortened, abbreviated version that took some of, the feel of it, at least him freeing Chewbacca, and brought that into, this movie.
Right. I personally liked it a lot, and it felt very natural because he didn't just stick with him because he saved him. He stuck with him for the first while because he had to get off that planet. And then through just some different things that happen, they kind of build a camaraderie and a trust with each other, and that's why they end up sticking together.
Yeah, I thought that was a good touch. So they end up escaping with Beckett's crew, and I thought the way they escaped was pretty interesting. It was, it gave them a little bit of action to go on, but then they end up going on this heist on the train because Han convinces them that they need him, and especially Chewbacca with the muscle. We get a few references here when they're sitting around the fire. They talk about Bosk, which is a bounty hunter in episode 5.
Yep.
Trandoshan. He's basically a big lizard man. But
I did catch that. That was kind of funny.
I thought that was a nice tie-in. Later, it's not here, but Aurora Singh is mentioned, who actually appears in episode 1. She's kind of just a brief cameo standing on a ledge. Has like this ponytail. She's a bounty hunter too, and has worked with Boba Fett in the Clone Wars cartoon.
Okay.
But it mentions that Beckett killed her by pushing her off a ledge, so there's been speculation we might see that in a backstory with Beckett. And this is where half of them die, which was an interesting choice. What did you think about this?
Yeah, like I said earlier, I was really surprised that they died this early, or really, I mean, I hadn't really thought about the fact that they needed to die either. So this caught me by surprise a lot. I also wasn't expecting to see Tandy Newton from Westworld here. That was a surprise. I didn't realize she was in this movie. But this whole opening scene is, I think, really fun, really riveting. In fact, when the train is falling off and they haven't freed the train yet for them to pull it off, I was really, really tense.
Yeah, I was the same way. I did not expect us to go into a heist action sequence this early. And I didn't expect us to see Infy's nest this early either, because she comes in with her group and attacks Beckett's group. So here we have Rio, who is voiced by Jon Favreau. He's the little four-armed guy. He ends up getting shot. And I'm like, oh, it's just going to be a flesh wound. Nope, he ends up dying from that wound. So I did not expect that. And then Val blows herself up to keep the plan moving ahead. And then they escape, and Han Solo drops the I can't think of the name of it. Delinium? Something like that?
Oh, the crystal stuff.
Yeah, it's the main point of the movie, and I'm blanking on the name.
It's really just a MacGuffin is what it is.
Yeah. Anyways, I did not expect either of them to die that early in the movie, but I think it kind of, it worked to move the plot forwards. It kind of kept the cast trimmed down. It would have gotten too bloated if they hadn't, and it was unexpected. So from that point of view, I think it worked very well. Yeah,
I don't even know what I'm trying to say. I think it did work. One of the things, there's actually two things I want to say about this. The first one is I appreciate that they are kind of really telling you what these blaster bolts do, the kind of damage they do. Because to me, I've always felt like the blaster bolts, I didn't understand what they were. I didn't understand if they were like a bullet, where if it hits your arm, you're fine, or if they could be healed, or what. Because it depends. Like sometimes it hits armor and it doesn't do anything. Sometimes it hits your arm and it kills you, or sometimes it hits your arm and you're fine. So I kind of appreciate that they're starting to flesh that out a little bit more through all these new movies. I don't think it'll ever be super clear. Maybe it is in the EU. But I also really appreciate this movie is fast. This movie gets on the ball. and goes through everything. And that is one of the reasons I like this so much. I was not expecting it to be this fast and to be this interesting. I think the pacing in this movie is really, really, really good.
It's interesting because it's technically a prequel, but you can almost treat it like a sequel in the type of pacing it has. Because Han Solo and Chewbacca have already been introduced. We know who they are. So yes, we have to kind of introduce them again and see their meeting, but we can keep the plot moving forwards, keep everything going without going too deep into who this character is, what his motivations are and stuff, which really helps the movie by moving it along.
Yeah, I agree.
So we get our first Lando intro. So it was pretty clear it was Lando from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And I thought this was a perfect intro for him. You see him play Sabacc and cheat at it with Han, which is kind of brings us back to later in the movie when Han wins it back. And then in episode 5, I think, where he says he wins it fair and square, the Falcon.
Oh, that's true. I didn't even notice that.
Yep. So I thought that was a nice nod to that. Also, Lando keeps calling Han Han, which was perfect. And Han's like, that's not how it's pronounced.
That's what I was talking about earlier when we were in spoiler-free territory. Like, I felt like it's not really a spoiler, but I don't want to spoil that for people. Because for me, that was really funny. I'm like, it totally explains why he's saying it wrong in the entire original trilogy.
Yep. There was just so many things with Lando. In fact, in his ship, you can see like a little version of Cloud City showing him that he's dreaming about, eventually doing mining, even though when he gets to the mining planet, he says mining's awful. But they did a really good job with him. You get a cameo from Ron Howard's brother.
Oh, really?
Yes. Whatever his name is. I bet his last name's Howard.
I think his name is Ron Howard's brother.
Clint Howard. He plays the ringmaster in the droid kind of gladiator fights that L3 gets mad about.
Okay, yeah.
I thought that was just an interesting cameo. He's in a lot of Ron Howard's movies.
Yeah, how did you feel about L3, by the way?
I didn't have a problem with her like a lot of other people. She served her purpose, I thought. A lot of people are saying, how could a droid have this type of personality? But it's hinted at a lot in the different movies and comics and books. They basically say if you don't wipe a droid's memory every so often, their processors start messing up and they basically come up with their own personality. So if you notice, R2's memory has never been wiped. And so he has a unique personality. K2SO had a unique personality. Whereas the other droids that were like K2SO and Rogue One were very strict, formal. It's because the Empire wipes their minds on a regular basis because that's what you're supposed to do with droids if you want them to be droids, not people droids or, whatever.
Right. I didn't realize people had an issue with her because to me, she felt like she fit in like a lot, especially like I feel like there's a natural evolution between R2 to BB-8 to K2SO to L3. Like that feels very natural to me, and so I didn't even think that it was strange. I don't know if her storyline was necessarily needed in the movie. It provided some interesting stuff, and from a plot perspective, it was probably needed. But I didn't have an issue with her at all.
Yeah, I didn't have an issue. I thought her death was actually done really well. It showed a lot of Lando's character. You don't see a ton of, emotion or attachment from him until she dies. And he's, trying to pull her along. He gets shot. Han has to go out and drag him along. And Chewie comes out and helps. And when he's trying to talk to her as she's dying, he's basically saying, how can I help? I want to save you. And you really don't get that feel from him the entire movie other than this point. But it gives you a reference. Oh, he does have feelings. He does care about things. He's not just completely in it for himself, which you can build upon later when he protects Cloud City by making a deal with the Empire, when he joins the rebellion and, shoots down the Death Star, because he actually does care about, a bigger picture.
Right. Yeah, I think that they do a really good job laying those pieces here for really all the characters. And from here, we kind of end up going on a space adventure. Basically, this is the Kessel Run that they've talked about in so many of the movies.
So the Kessel Run in the comics not the comics, the EU is very close to this. It's basically a bunch of black holes that you have to navigate around. And the reason Han can do it in 12 parsecs is because he flew closer to the black holes. And that's almost what happens here. He's able to cut this down to 12 parsecs, although Chewie implies that it's much higher unless you round down. That he can do this by kind of cutting through this maelstrom, this big cloud of stuff.
Yeah, so I was not expecting... I mean, I knew he was going to go into it. I feel like that was pretty clear. What I was not expecting was for there to be a black hole in there, or there to be this ridiculous monster.
I was not expecting the monster either. Well, I kind of was, because you could kind of see tentacles in the trailer, but I thought that was just going to be a minor part. I didn't think they were going to have to deal with this whole thing.
Right.
Also, they did basically make it through because of L3. So when she died, they plugged her into the computer.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the navigation on the Falcon, which they make reference to in the other movies. In fact, C-3PO interacts with L3 in episode 5, says the computer on the Falcon has a peculiar dialect, which is a fun little nod, I guess, forwards when they plug L3 in.
Sure. Yeah, I didn't have an issue with this monster either. I know some people probably are going to say it's not very Star Wars-y. It felt good to me, though, because, I mean, there's a line in one of the movies that Han has seen some weird stuff, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just going to say, it's not any weirder than a giant space slug, or in one of the cartoons, there's big whales with, like, tentacles that can jump into hyperspace. So I don't think this is... Yeah, I don't think this is any weirder than those things.
Yeah, and also, it's off the beaten path, so it makes sense that it's something that we would not have seen before. So when we get to the end of the movie, we do end up on this other planet. This is where I kind of felt like the movie slowed down a little too much for me personally. The rest of the movie has been very fast and very action-packed. In this one, we do have that kind of few moments there where nothing's really happening. I think it was good up to a point. I think maybe they should have cut it down a little bit more, personally.
Yeah, it did drag a little bit near this point, especially when they're just kind of sitting around after Enfy's Nest has, told them who she is. It just, it kind of felt like they could have moved it along a little bit quicker. And I think this is a main complaint with the movie, that some of these parts could have been trimmed down.
Right. But for me, as much as I'm saying it's like that, it's a small complaint in the grand scheme of the rest of the movie. But it is here where we do get the reveal about Enfy's Nest, and it's not this terrifying guy that's behind the mask. It's this young woman who's just trying to, ultimately, we find out, start the rebellion.
Yeah. So, for those that don't know, there's a lot of different rebel cells. There's not just one huge rebellion. That main rebellion was started by Mon Mothma and Bail Organa. But there was a lot of little ones. In fact, in Rogue One, you see one with the Saw Gerrera's partisans. They're in the TV show Rebels. They're a group. And they all join together at some point, which is what you see at the end of Rogue One with that group of people around the table talking. That's a bunch of different rebel cells who are working together. So it is implied that Enfy's Nest is its own rebel cell. And we have a few small cameos here. Warwick Davis, who's played a lot of different characters, plays Weasel, and he appeared in The Phantom Menace in Mos Espa. And also, there was a Tognath, which is basically a person with like a face mask, and he was Benthic Two Tubes, possibly, appeared in Rogue One. So it was Saw Gerrera's like right-hand man, basically.
Okay.
If you remember who that is, he... at least an alien species of his was working with Enfy's Nest. That being said, I wasn't super surprised that Enfy's Nest was like a teenage girl. The way they zoomed in and everything, it was supposed to, bring you the shock factor. But I don't know, I kind of expected her to be a girl. I don't know why. And Her age did surprise me. I did expect her to be older.
This really actually surprised me and confused me. Because when she took her helmet off, the way that Beckett looks at her, I thought for a minute that she was his daughter.
Yeah, the way it was portrayed, it seemed like somebody we should have recognized.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder if maybe that's left over from the previous cut with Phil Lord and Chris Miller, and maybe that's something that was cut from the film, because it is odd the way it's filmed.
Yeah, that could very well be true. Either way, I think this is kind of the way Captain Phasma should have been done, but she was done in like such a way that she was menacing, imposing, she had great armor, and a good storyline and motivation that made sense, and some actual screen time.
Which one are we talking about?
Infy's Nest.
Okay, yes, I agree. I really like what they did with the character. It was an interesting reveal that she was going to be part of a rebellion, and I think that it kind of explains Han maybe a little bit more in some of the other movies. How he was just going to leave, and then he decided to come back in Episode 4. How you're kind of planting those seeds of a rebellion here. And I don't feel it's too overt.
No, I really liked what they did with this, with the kind of the future seeds you're going to see.
Now, one character we haven't really talked about is Paul Bettany's character in this movie. What's his name?
Dryden Voss.
Dryden Voss. All right. So I really, really enjoyed his performance in this movie.
Yeah, he was threatening and kind of comforting at the same time. He did a really good job playing the, I'm your friend. Oh, sorry, you disappointed me. I have to kill you.
Yeah, he felt like a mob boss, which makes sense because that's exactly what he's supposed to be.
Yep. He's also a master of Terras Kasi, which there was a big Star Wars game, Terras Kasi, and I thought this kind of combat was really interesting in a Star Wars movie because it's something different than just shooting with a blaster or flipping around, with a lightsaber. It's kind of a martial arts type of combat. And I enjoyed watching him and Kira fight when they got to that point.
Yeah, I agree. That was really interesting. I did think at one point she probably could have just stood up and shot him.
Yeah, there were a couple times I'm like, why don't you just shoot him? Or she stops Han from shooting him just to kill him herself. So there were a few things in that last fight that didn't necessarily make a ton of sense, but I mean, I know why they did it. It's a movie thing to make it, more suspenseful, better fight scenes.
Dramatic.
So I understand at that point.
Yeah, I did enjoy their fight at the end, though. I did not expect her to, well, A, end up killing him, but B, end up taking the ship. I really expected her to die here.
I did too. I did not expect her to live through this movie. And when she killed him and survived, I'm like, wow, maybe Beckett's going to kill her eventually. But once Han kills Beckett, it's, she flies away and you're like, well, that was unexpected. I guess she's set up for a sequel in either this, a solo movie or a different movie.
Right. Which does lead into the biggest reveal in the movie, Maul, which I was shocked. So he came up and I heard the voice and I'm like, man, that voice sounds familiar. Who is that? And I'm going through the list in my head. I'm like, it's not any of those people. And then it shows the side of him and I'm like, oh, he's in close. Well, he looks like a Sith. It's not Sidious. It's not Darth Vader. Who is this?
So I had heard rumors before that Darth Maul was possibly going to show up. And in fact, he does. They have him ignite his double-sided lightsaber just to let audience know that's who it is.
A new one, actually. It's not the same one.
Yes, it is a new one that dates back to kind of the Inquisitors from Star Wars Rebels and kind of looks like what he has in Star Wars Rebels. But he's played by Ray Park, who plays him in The Phantom Menace.
Which I was surprised because I didn't think he looked the same either.
Yeah, I thought he looked a little CGI, but I think that was just a side effect of the hologram.
Okay,
He's
yeah.
voiced, though, by Sam Witwer, who voiced him in the Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels, as well as a few video games. So it's neat to have him coming back to voice him after voicing him in all of these other movies or TV shows.
Yeah, it's interesting because Ray Park played him in episode 1, and Maul has like one line in that movie. And that's not Ray Park's voice. They dubbed over another actor for him. And in this one, when I found out it was Ray Park, I'm like, oh, well, they actually let him use his voice this time, but they didn't. They dubbed over Sam Witwer, who, for those of you keeping up, actually played Doomsday in Smallville. But yeah, he's like the official voice of Darth Maul at this point.
Yeah. So for a lot of you who don't know, Darth Maul survived the events of The Phantom Menace, episode 1, which is clear in Solo. Basically, they say he survived because of hatred for Obi-Wan Kenobi, which is kind of weird, but they wanted to keep him around. So he gets like spider legs, and then he gets regular legs.
Robotic spider legs.
Robotic spider legs, yeah. You actually see his regular robotic legs in the shot. They kind of zoom in, not zoom in, but they put him in the main focus just to show you that that's how he survived. He has, robot legs. But he ends up fighting Darth Sidious, Emperor Palpatine, and a lot of other things, but he survives all the way up to almost to episode 4. Not quite that far, but he makes it a ways.
Yeah, so all of this has been in the Star Wars Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels TV shows, maybe also a few books. And so he's been alive in the canon for a long time, and people watching the movies just didn't really know. And I was really surprised that he was here, 1, because I didn't have any idea, but 2, because we've already seen the beginning, middle, and end of his story. The beginning was in The Phantom Menace, the middle was in Clone Wars, and the end was in Rebels. We've seen his death, and that is canon. So we know that he has to make it through these movies. And so him popping up here, I was like, well, is this to set up for a sequel? Or is this to set up for some other thing in the EU that we don't even know about?
I was curious about that too. I didn't know if it was just like a short cameo, but Kira heading over to Dathomir where he's at makes it seem like maybe it's going to be a Solo sequel. Maybe it's going to be the Kenobi movie that's been rumored for a long time. Either way, I was really, really surprised that they put him in this movie because the general movie-going audience isn't aware that Darth Maul lived past episode 1. So them kind of going all in is saying, look, we recognize this TV shows and they're canon. Unlike what Disney's doing, they claim they are, but they don't actually put Marvel, mix their TV shows and movies. Star Wars is doing it. It's, taking these ideas from outside of the movies and putting them inside of it.
Yeah, I thought that was really, really interesting because you do always have, the movies feed out into the books and into the other things. And sometimes you have things from the others that feed into the movies, but it's small things. And for something this major to be put in here, I know it's caused a lot of confusion for people that aren't in the know. But at the same time, we have the internet. We have people that do know, and they're being educated about this, which I think is really interesting. I have a hard time believing that this is going to be for a Han Solo sequel, which they could totally do, but it wouldn't make sense, I don't think, given how episode 4 plays out, that Han has seen Darth Maul or that Kira has become a Sith, or not even a Sith, because actually Darth Maul is not a Sith at this point. He's a dark Jedi or a dark Force user, whatever you want to call him. And so I don't know if she's going to become one of those. I don't think that Han is ever going to see them, though, because he doesn't believe in magic and the Jedi when episode 4 rolls around.
I agree. I don't think it'd make a ton of sense, especially since it's kind of hinting that he's going to go to Tatooine with a job with Jabba the Hutt. So, in Dryden Voss's ship, did you notice anything on the tables? Anything at all, Caleb?
Nothing besides those jewels.
Well, in the back, there's a Mandalorian Rally Master armor. But, interestingly, there's the Golden Idol from Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is a neat nod there. There's also a Crystal Skull. So there's some debate whether that's from Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which I kind of hope it isn't because that was an awful movie, or if it was from Han Solo and the Lost Legacy, which is just some random book with a crystal skull on the front. They also had a big Sith holocron, but there's a lot of Easter eggs kind of hidden around there, which is neat because it's hinting towards, he has a Sith connection with the Sith holocron, or, well, the idol from Indiana Jones is just a fun Easter egg.
Well, there's a comic where Indiana Jones travels forward in time, or back in time, and meets Han.
I have seen that one. It's very interesting. Fun play on Harrison Ford and Harrison Ford.
Yeah, and that's pretty much how this movie ends. We get a couple more shots of the heroes and them flying off, and of course the iconic scene where Han goes back and does win the Falcon in the game of Sabacc, which is what that story has always been in the EU. So it is nice to play that out and see that played out. And we get the original Falcon from episode 4 we see here, where it's got the front cut out, which it hasn't for the rest of the movie, which I thought that was actually fun, because when we first see the Falcon, it's all clean and everything, and it might still be clean on the inside, but it got destroyed during the Kessel Run, and it's fun to see that actually had consequences, and that's why it is the way it is in the other movies.
Yeah, I thought that was a good way to go from, oh, look, it's a new ship, to, well, it's the piece of junk we see in the later movies.
Right. And one thing I do want to point out that I think this movie does really well, a lot of prequels fall into the trap of, oh, hey, we're going to show how a character gets everything. Look, Han gets his blaster. Look, that's where he gets his haircut. And look, that's where he gets his jacket. And there is some of that in this movie, but it's not this whole movie. And it's not, I don't think, super overt. I think the only really overt one is when he gets his gun. But I'm not even sure. I think he gets a different gun later in the movie.
No, I think that's the gun he kind of keeps around.
It's the same one? Okay.
Yeah. It's his iconic, blaster.
Right. Okay. So I feel like that's like the only one that they really focus on that doesn't necessarily make sense to focus on. But I feel like the rest of this is just informing the character, and it's not pandering.
Yeah. I think they did a good job of kind of throwing in some of these references to the later movies, but keeping it separate, its own movie, its own feel.
I agree. So that pretty much brings us to the ending of the movie. And I know we talked about this a little bit at the end of non-spoilers, but I do want to reiterate, I thought that this was a fantastic movie. This is a movie for the fans, like you've mentioned with Darth Maul. It doesn't really make sense for people that don't know, but I feel like this is also just a really great movie in general. It flows really well. It's got great pacing. I think all the characters do really, really great. And so for me, I would highly recommend that you go see this in theaters. And if you decide to wait, definitely catch it when it comes out on disc.
Yeah, I agree. I thought this was, I'm not going to say it was the same as the original series, but it had the same kind of feel compared to like the sequel trilogy or the prequel trilogy. And I think that's just like the space battles, the characters who were in it. So I would recommend going to see this movie at least some point.
All right. Well, this movie currently, last time I checked, Blaine, worldwide it had grossed $148 million. And this is a little disappointing for Disney, actually, because it was projected to make 170 opening weekend, and I believe this is actually the lowest grossing for the weekend opening of a Star Wars movie of the Disney ones.
Yeah, I think that's right. Especially on a Memorial Day weekend, they expected this to do really well, and it did. I think this is domestically, it did 84 million, projected to be 100 million. But with a budget of 250 to like 300 million, which is the most expensive Star Wars movie, they really expected a much better return from this. So there's a few thoughts. Maybe it's The Last Jedi that's bringing it down. Maybe it's Star Wars fatigue, the rushed production. Who knows what it is, but something's made this do a lot worse than they projected.
Yeah, I think it's probably a combination of those things. And it is worth noting, we are recording this on Memorial Day, on that Monday. So we don't quite have the final numbers for the full 4-day weekend. I do think this movie will have some legs, though. I think a lot of people probably aren't seeing this because of either family stuff that they're doing this weekend, or maybe they didn't think it was going to be good because it's an unnecessary movie, which I kind of feel like this movie justifies itself once you see it. So I do think that good word of mouth will carry this longer.
Yep, this is definitely a word of mouth movie, so we'll see how it does in the future.
All right, well, Blaine, I am really glad that you are on here for this episode. I am glad that you are our first ever guest. I think that this went really well. We are hoping to have some other guests in the future. Hopefully Zach can join us as well for those. But thank you for being our replacement, Zach.
Thanks for having me.
And, I guess I'll do the whole Zach thing. You know who else wants to be a replacement Zach?
Who's that?
Taylor Poole. So we would like you to check out Taylor Poole. He did our opening music and is currently composing some new opening music for us. Ooh. Mm-hmm. You can find him at taylorpoolemusic.com. That's TaylorPoole music.com.
I'd also like to give a shout out to CNC Power Hour. On Twitch, they stream Magic the Gathering and video games throughout the week.
And also, please check out our website, causewe'renerds.com. It's the best way to share our show with someone else because you can find all the places where you can listen to our show, and it's super easy, so please check that out. Thanks for listening to 'Cause We're Nerds. We would love to hear your comments and feedback at causewe'renerds@gmail.com. That's CUZWERENERDS@gmail.com. Or leave us a review on iTunes or Facebook. You can also, of course, follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Next month is E3. So, next week we will be doing a video games focused episode. We don't exactly know what we're going to cover yet, but we will let you know, and we can assure you that it will be super exciting because it is our 25th episode. So please join us back for that. And as always, stay nerdy.
Cue the outro music.